Hi, hello, everyone. Welcome back to Intentional Oversharing with me, your host, Neely Kimey. Today, I have a very special guest. I have Nav Rao with me today, and I'm really excited to have you, Nav. Would you like to just tell us a little bit about yourself, whatever you want to share, maybe how we know each other, whatever, go for it.
Probably how we know each other a bit might be more interesting because it really came from the most uninteresting platform, right? LinkedIn. Like just seriously starting to just shit post. I can't say shit, right? All right,
You
cool.
can say whatever the fuck you want, Nav.
Good Lord, language. So yeah, that was probably how we met. I remember watching a video, two videos actually that you did on this podcast, and both of them were just excellent. And then I think I also DM'd you because I saw Burnout and you're literally on your like byline on LinkedIn. And I thought, yeah, Burnout, that's a person to talk to. And then we had what do you call it? Mutual fondness for Nala content. Nala Land.
Yes, Mona from Nanalan is up in the corner, and we both love Nanalan. Anybody
It's
that's a
just
friend of Mona is a friend of mine.
it's just so uplifting and in this weird kind of like bizarre, almost like a modern day Teletubbies type of thing, you know? I am a software engineer by choice and I'm from Fiji. So I spent my, what do you call it, the elementary years in Hawaii being indoctrinated into American culture and American English. And then I went back to Fiji where I did my high school years, being fed colonial English, British English. And after that, I spent about 13 years in New Zealand before I decided to move over to Australia, where I am right now. And through that entire period of time, I've basically been a nerd. I've been spending all my time on the computers, built a career out of it, made some money, didn't make some money, lost some money, and burnt out a fair few times. Twice so badly that I actually just changed my career out of the blue. And now I am effectively a roving software engineer for hire. We used to call them part-timers. Now it's called fractional. On a personal level, I should say, I have been diagnosed with social anxiety and chronic depression. And through the entire journey, I'm just trying to figure out how to deal with all of that. Plus every single thing that every millennial has to deal with in this current age.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. So you mentioned a few different things that I definitely wanted us to kind of talk about, spend some time talking about today. So you had said that burnout, you had noticed something on my profile on LinkedIn that mentioned burnout, and that caught your eye. And then you mentioned that you've gone through your own cycles of burnout, which I think that a lot of listeners can relate to. What was your experience like with burnout?
One of the mistakes that I made was attempting to do my own startup while in uni. And so university being college in the US. So, and I did it in a completely new country, New Zealand. One of the problems with a startup is, especially when you're in a situation where you actually have a full-time job, I would consider an education a full-time job, and I would consider the startup a full-time job. So I really was doing two jobs. And the other problem with startups is, especially if you're a founder of a startup, it's not instant money. It's not like you're Uber. And if you're a complete unknown in a country that doesn't have VC money piped through, the faucets, then you tend to bootstrap. You tend to figure out your own way to keep the business running. And that actually means doing other work. So when you really think about it, I'm almost doing three jobs. One job being the startup, one job being to make money to feed the startup, and another job to be educated. And it was just, I did that for about 3 years and I hit a wall. I constantly went through little tiny micro cycles of burnout in that period where I would get so tired that I would just spend an entire week lounging in bed watching Star Trek Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. I just love those shows because they was just so slow and methodical that I could just like fall asleep watching them. And then I'd go back to work and I would do it all over again, you know, just a little bit less tired each time. That would probably be the first time I experienced that, even the concept of burnout.
How long ago was that?
That was ye old days. Probably something like 15 years ago.
The reason I ask like when that was, something that you and I have talked a little bit about, and I was hoping to explore today as well, is like how much the tech industry really has changed. Like you've been in the industry or adjacent to the industry for quite a while now. And I know that I can speak from my experience, which was very much like on the fringes. I think we've talked about like I did UX design briefly. I wanted to do the whole like break into tech thing, which that was big, I guess like in the late, I don't know, like the 2010s. That
Yep.
whole kind of time seemed like there was a lot of emphasis on quickly learn enough to get you hired and you'll be set for life and you'll make six figures and it'll be easy peasy, all of that stuff. And so I didn't even do that until kind of it was already starting to, I think, slow down a little bit in like the early 2020s. I know that like I was always paying attention and wanting to do it. I wanted to get into coding. And then I ended up just deciding UX design because that industry was blowing up around that time. And it seemed the most like it fit what I wanted to do the most. I'm just curious, like, if you can speak at all to how, like, the changes that you've seen in that amount of time. Because I feel like there are a lot of people that maybe they are in tech now, but they might not have as much experience as you do at this point.
Surprised a lot of people. I actually don't think there was that much change. I am completely speaking from a very like a perspective of someone who entered the world of startups, and someone entering the world of startups and someone entering like your 9 to 5 software engineering role. It's quite different. The impulse to quickly ship something was still there. The little community of hackers and software engineers that want to build their own product and become billionaires was still there. It was just harder to get into. Not from the sense of like, oh, there are these, ephemeral bodies or these like bodies of individuals or organizations that are stopping you from entering, but more like you needed more time and resource. There's more friction. You have to learn something. Like you have to spend a bit of time learning to code and spend a bit of time knowing what to learn in the first place. I think now there's so much content that you could probably spend all your time on TikTok, for crying out loud, and learn everything you needed to start a career in software engineering. Like there's just so much there. If you wanted to, you could probably spend all your time on Instagram and get acquainted with software engineering. You're also going to get sold a whole bunch of crypto schemes, but you're going to learn software engineering. And because of that, I think there's now so many people that want to become billionaires. There's so many people that are thinking, that's going to be my pathway to success. In order to build a company, a tech company, I'm not saying a successful tech company, I'm just saying a tech company, you need a laptop, you need internet, and that's it. You need a LinkedIn, obviously, so you can change your title to founder. But that is literally it. And it was definitely a lot harder back then because there was just so much more to learn. It feels more saturated is definitely a big difference right now as well.
I noticed that a lot in the UX industry, for sure. It was very much painted in a way to sell seats in boot camps. And so it was like, yeah, all you have to do is just do this, maybe a few month long, maybe even a few weeks long boot camp, and you'll have enough to at least get in and then smooth sailing from then on. And it definitely wasn't that straightforward in my experience. And there was a lot of competition. And now it just seems like because of all the competition and there aren't jobs, there just aren't the jobs to employ those people, no matter how much they know about whichever sect of the industry they're in.
I remember that era, if you will, because I was doing e-commerce. Like I was building like e-commerce websites, and I was using a platform called Magento. Like oh god, it was the worst. They bought the product, they bought the platform, and they made it even worse. And I couldn't even believe that's possible. It was just so difficult. And I remember working with a bunch of UX engineers at the time. And I thought, that's a new role. That's kind of cool. And what really stood out to me was that they were looking at how people use the product and they envisioned how people would use the product. So they didn't just think design, they didn't just think engineering, but they thought behavior. And that was something that I got really fixated on, because in e-commerce, you're kind of like, you're trying all these little dark patterns. I'll freely admit to this, ways to nudge people to buy a product. And part of that is also like developing your user experience in a dark way to nudge people towards your product. I fell in love with data, and I actually thought for a while, and I reached out to a university in Wellington, which is in New Zealand, about a UX course. So I was thinking about the same thing. I was thinking, I'm so sick of writing code. I want to see impact. I want to actually like really be more strategic. And I thought about going into UX. What ultimately stopped me from doing it was I was an international student, and it was going to cost me so much.
Yeah. And maybe, of course, like, who knows? Because this is where you are now, regardless of anything. But, maybe it was for the best, considering how much that industry, like, it's saturated and it kind of blew up. But that was something that also caught my attention too, was like the dark patterns. I'm glad that you explained a little bit about what that means, because that's something that, like, if you wanted to hire a UX designer, you could kind of like manipulate what they understand psychologically, or maybe if they have a research background. Like for me, I have a psychology and a research background, and you could like use that to your advantage to employ those dark patterns. So it's something that, like, I think that people need to be aware is a thing, and kind of know to keep an eye out for it, because it's absolutely, like, it's rampant in the industry. This is like how it works. Back to the startup that you were starting up whenever you were in school. This first instance of burnout that you can recall. I guess, like, in my mind, and I would love for you to clarify this. In my mind, I think when I think of startups, I think like that's another aspect of the tech industry that's always been kind of touted as, just like start your own company, like easy peasy, be your own boss, make your own money, don't answer to anybody, like no big deal. And like, so I'm wondering if that was your perception of it then, or were you like, where was your head at with that? What kind of like drove you to do that?
I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I wanted some money. I wanted to have a really fancy apartment. I didn't come from like the most wealthy background, and I just kept seeing all these, it's not a derogatory thing to say, but nerds like myself who are like making millions. If Mark Zuckerberg could pull out a Facebook using the same like tech stack that I knew, which was like PHP at the time, I thought, I could do this. I could build the next thing. It's kind of like, when it's a little joke about how, well, I could have invented peanut butter. It's such an obvious mix, right? And I just thought I could do it. I could become like a billionaire. And the other thing was just, and I'm not going to sugarcoat this, I was extremely lonely. And I always came from that environment of like, just put yourself into your work. You put yourself into your work, it's a distraction. And I loved the distraction because I was constantly playing around with new concepts. And at the time, the startup was focused on building digital magazines. So this was the iPad era. Like, it had just sort of started up, and everyone was trying to like ship a magazine app. Like Time was trying to build that magazine app, and you had National Geographic, and you had all these different like fancy apps that were basically digital magazines, and that was our startup. So I thought, wow, this is going to be cool. I love digital magazines. I love comics. I could see, a future in this. That was the other part. I was just genuinely like the technology. I thought it'll be really, really cool. And I think I also got kind of sold by my business partner at the time, my co-founder, who was a very like charismatic person. So yeah, all those things.
Sounds like a recipe for like, why not? Let's go. Give it a try.
Yeah. I don't regret that choice because I think that period of time taught me a lot about what I shouldn't do if I were to do my next startup. And it's definitely given me a lot of lessons now. It's definitely made me very cynical. But that cynicism has made me very funny on LinkedIn. And it's also kind of made me a bit more pragmatic when I'm talking to other founders and trying to help them build their product.
That makes sense, that having that experience, even if it might have been largely stressful and leading to burnout, at least there's something that you can there's a lot of knowledge that you can carry with you from that experience. I'm wondering if you feel comfortable sharing and if you can recall what got you out of that burnout whenever you experienced it.
Yeah, the best thing about being me is I'm constantly thinking about every single thing in my life, which is testament to a lot of people like ourselves. But I've thought about it a lot, and I had a very singular mindset at the time. I was quite lucky. I was quite privileged that my dad, when I really needed money, was there to support me. And I would just take this break. I would hit this wall of sort of, all right, Clint, who was my co-founder at the time, I would say, I need a break. Like, I just need a week. Just give me a week. And he would, figure out how to stretch the deadline or ask me to do A and B and just get to a certain milestone, and I'd sort of begrudgingly try to hit that milestone, and then I'll take a break. And when I did that, I played video games. I just played video games. Like, I would go and get a secondhand console if I didn't have one already, and I would just play whatever was the latest release, and I would not leave the house. It was just video games, takeout, cigarettes, and video games until I fell asleep. And I did the next day. And then I'd really just threw myself into it. I loved games that had a story because it would suck me in. It was never like a game mechanic issue. It was always a story. So I just went along for the ride. And it's kind of like digging into a giant trilogy series in a book, like a Game of Thrones or something. Yeah. That was it. Escapism.
I'm hearing themes of something that I like to just bring up and kind of see people's responses or reaction to it as our relationship with dissociating. It's the type of sure, it's considered like a clinical term, but I tend to associate lots of different behaviors with dissociation, whether people draw that conclusion normally about those types of behaviors. But I attribute a lot of different things to dissociating and just removing ourselves from reality so that we can pass the time, escape, whatever it is. And there's in theory, there's more healthier ways of doing that, I suppose. But just in terms of it being a way to kind of remove yourself from reality, it just sounds like to me, you were dissociating. I'm wondering if you have noticed a theme of that throughout your life in different ways.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. From childhood, it's I didn't realize it. I didn't put a term to it until much later in life. But yeah, it's easier to not be where you are. And yeah, I went for every distraction. I will say, I think there are distractions that are kind of good. the distractions that kind of give you endorphins, the distractions that kind of give you. So much later in life, I developed a fondness for martial arts. Just came out of nowhere as a completely random thing that actually happened in the middle of a burnout period. And I loved that. Like I would spend 7 days a week doing Muay Thai. And that definitely was a distraction, but I felt good doing it. I felt so dang good, your body feels good. You're eating better because you're exercising and you're around a whole bunch of people who are very different from your career people. And you're not constantly thinking about work because you're not constantly surrounded by work people or people in your industry. And yeah, that's very different from a video game or a book.
I'm definitely not trying to like say that playing video games or reading a book is something that we shouldn't do or like use as a means to escape, especially like you shared that this is like video games were part of the equation to help get you out of burnout. It's just an interesting thing that I think it helps for people to consider the various different ways they might engage in that to try to escape.
I do not fault or think that video games are bad in any kind of way. I think it's just one of those things where, like, when people say, well, a candy bar isn't bad, and I've, gone through body issues and stuff like that. And I remember going to a therapist who said, you have to stop considering it as a binary thing of like good or bad food. It's how much you consume, how often you consume it, that kind of thing. I tell myself that all the time whenever I have a Nutella, like a jar, and I'm thinking, I could just lick this thing clean. I think back to those words, and I think, too much of a good thing, Nav, too much of a good thing, right? It's too much of a good thing. And I think that's what I feel is probably the bad part of video games and even cannabis. Like I love edibles. I'm a big edible person. You get addicted to the feeling of something. It's not like a literal chemical addiction, or maybe it is. I have no idea. But you get addicted to a feeling of something. And I think with video games, it just makes you, if you keep playing over and over again, then you're too comfortable in that space. And you don't get to challenge yourself with something else. Don't get to challenge yourself with a walk or a run or, I don't know, some other type of exercise like learning how to draw or playing the guitar or something. I think that's where it becomes more of a disservice. But otherwise, dang, there's nothing more fun than like a bit of, Animal Crossing, a little bit of The Sims. I love The Sims. Just games where you don't actually have to win. You can just kind of play.
Sometimes it can give you like actual relief from whatever is causing you stress. I think that so something that my therapist has encouraged me to do, because we've identified that dissociating in various ways is like a common theme in my life. She'll encourage me to try to add intentionality to it. So it's like, okay, like I'm feeling dysregulated or I'm like stressed out or something. Just intentionally in my mind saying, I'm just gonna scroll on TikTok for an hour.
Mm.
Like making the decision rather than your hand just naturally like going toward the phone and it just starts happening and then the time gets ahead of you. This is bringing up another thought in my head. And I want to know if you've heard of it. Are you familiar with the term the default mode network?
I think I am. Is it kind of like where your body just sort of moves towards a particular action?
Essentially, yeah. It's like your brain being on autopilot, pretty much.
Mm.
And it's more involved, and there's a way better like explanation of what it is than just that. But I learned about it whenever I started doing ketamine assisted psychotherapy and using like therapeutic psychedelics. Basically, like what psychedelics can do for you is they can make like with the default mode network, I'm going to try my best to explain it a little bit. But it's basically like there are neural pathways in your brain that are being used so regularly that it's like a well-worn path, pretty much. And so it's very easy for your like say that your brain wants dopamine or it wants like a certain chemical, it's very easy for it to be like, oh, every time I go on TikTok, I get that dopamine. So like you don't even have to like consciously think about that action. Your brain just already knows like, I'm going to get what I want if I do this. Essentially, like us just operating on autopilot in general is that default mode network at play. And whenever you take psychedelics, for example, that's one way where you can start to try out those other neural pathways in your brain and like start to choose other actions and like actually intentionally make a choice to do something maybe different from what your default mode network wants you to do. So it puts you like in that state of mind.
It sounds very similar to like the concepts around neuroplasticity, right? How many of us actually remember the trip to work, like back when we had an office, or some of you still have an office? I would. It's blank. I just do not remember it. I would just hop on a train. I know I hated it, but I don't remember it. And then I'd get to work, and before you know it, I'm out of work and I am at home. And I try to think back to like the journey, and the journey is just completely blank. And I think the same happens sometimes with video games, where or doom scrolling on TikTok or whatever it is. I don't remember it, so I'm not very intentional with it. It just sort of happens. It's a lot harder to do things like ketamine-assisted therapies or anything like that. Over here in Australia, I think there are a lot more clinics that are looking at it, but it's definitely not as legally introducible to many people's lives. I say legally. Anyway, I will say that there's also a lot to be said about autopilot and its effect on dementia, at least future dementia. And I've been sort of reading about this thanks to someone in the neighborhood. We need to basically keep our brain working. And if we're in this process of like defaulting all the time and not actually challenging our default routes, then we're not really creating those sort of little pathways in our brain. And that's just kind of making us lazy and sounding very much not like a scientist right now. I believe that kind of like pushes us towards that sort of dementia state in the future.
That makes sense. I mean, yeah, neither of us are scientists. We're just chatting and sharing our experiences. But yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And that's something that I'll definitely want to look into a little bit more as well. I think that it's kind of like, because whenever I think about your example of doing martial arts, like it requires like multiple decisions, like conscious effort and decisions for you to go to a studio, go to a gym, and like you have to get dressed before you go. You have to wear certain clothing. You have to go there. You're like building neural pathways while you're there because you're learning new things. And so it's like, yeah, I think that there are video games where there's probably opportunities to learn new things and learn new ways of like exploring whatever this world is. But it would take a lot of convincing to try to convince me that you doing martial arts was just like part of like the default mode network at play and just being like on autopilot.
Yeah.
Like there's kind of like a distinction between the using something to escape because it brings you those like natural endorphins, but you had to like make it happen versus literally just like turning over in bed and picking up your controller.
You're probably familiar with how people have these little tricks to get out of bed. One trick I have is I don't close the curtains. The curtains are wide open. So when the sun is up, I'm up because I cannot block that out. And the other thing that a lot of people often do is they'll wear their gym clothes in bed. So they'll get out and they'll be like, cool, I'm now dressed. I don't need to go through this rigmarole. I think there's a little tiny hack so you can do to kind of reduce friction so that you can make it easier for yourself to move and go forward. Your thing that you don't really want to do. And for myself, and I'll kind of touch on this because it relates to burnout. I quit my job at the time and I was doing marketing, funnily enough. I just thought, well, I'm in e-commerce. I've been building these e-commerce websites, and gosh, the marketing part's pretty dang easy, you know? Maybe I should just like pivot into that. And I convinced the company to actually hire me to do it, which is bizarre. I don't know how I did that. And it was actually a fun role. And it was definitely a lot harder than I took it for granted. But I will say that when I quit that role, again, because of burnout, but for a very different reason, it was more a environmental problem. The company I was with was just not a great company. I was taking like odd jobs, that like little floating period where you're like unemployed and you're thinking, well, I got to pay for rent and I got to pay for oatmeal. I can get oatmeal for free by going to this local co-working space, but I can't get my rent for free. So I would go to these little industry events. And one event that I went to had this lady who was doing Muay Thai. She had a gym. She needed help with marketing. Turns out I didn't want to do my taxes. So we did a kind of a barter system where I was like, look, I need to lose weight. I was about 135 kgs at the time. I was a big boy. So I thought, well, I don't have money to pay for a gym. What if, but I know I need to work out. What if I do like half a day of marketing for you? And I'll teach you to do it yourself instead of I'm always on the clock. And that's what I did. And she paid me with gym hours and private lessons. So it's free. I got to do it, right? And I think it was maybe like a month in, and I thought, oh my God, this is so fun. Like, this is so fun. I mean, I felt so bad, and the moments where I was like, oh, I'm going to throw up. I'm going to, but I actually like really started to enjoy it after a while. But don't get me wrong. As much as I loved martial arts, as much as I loved Muay Thai, I hated going to the gym. I hated catching the bus at 5 a.m. or at 6 a.m. to go to the gym. I hated it when it was raining. I absolutely hated everything about getting up early and preparing to go to the gym and the act of going to the gym. But I loved it when I was there. So maybe there's something in that. I don't know. But I carried on Muay Thai through my all the way until I actually came to the COVID lockdown, actually.
For me, my like Muay Thai was hot yoga. So there was like a period of time where at the time I could afford a yoga studio membership. Not the case at the moment, but that's okay. And there was this hot yoga place in Austin that I really loved. And I used to like go there with friends randomly whenever I would visit. And I really liked the vibe. And whenever I was able to get a membership, I would make myself go. This was whenever I had started in like the mental health industry. So after work, I was so stressed out because I was like I was working at a psych hospital. So it was a lot of very chaotic days with very chaotic patients, people dealing with a lot of really difficult, heavy stuff. And so after that, I would go to hot yoga with some of my coworkers. And it's so hard for like building habits can be really difficult if you have any sort of executive dysfunction at all. But what was cool about hot yoga is like I already was familiar with yoga itself, so I didn't have to learn all of like new terms necessarily. But the fact that it was like 90 degrees in there, literally, afterwards, I felt like I was floating on like a cloud. It felt so good. And like I didn't have a care in the world. It was like a drug. It felt like I was on drugs afterwards. And so like because it felt so good, that was my reason to go. Like how you mentioned the getting there sucks. Like putting the clothes on, getting there, making it happen. Hate that part. But once you're there, like I couldn't deny how good I felt afterwards. It was undeniable. This is also me just kind of trying to talk myself back into doing something.
I love hot yoga. I've done it because of Muay Thai. And this is the best part about it. Like when you do something like that, it starts to nudge you towards very different activities. So I think Muay Thai stopped me from really playing a lot of video games because I started appreciating that physical effort a bit more. So I didn't feel as good sitting down and playing a video game for 2 to 3 hours. I actually felt kind of like fidgety. I wanted to get out. It caused me to walk more. It caused me to do yoga. I was doing hot yoga for a while, and you're right. It's so euphoric. When you come out of there, you're like, not only are you leaving this like dark room with this like scent and heat that's kind of like a blanket over you, you feel lighter. You feel like you are on a drug. You literally do. And so I totally understand where you're coming from. And I get the same when I do like a sauna, or the same when I like lift weights or anything like that. Like it's this little tiny pathway that got created that's now created all these little branching pathways and saying, hey, have you considered doing a run? No, I don't like running. But, all these other things that I could do and all these potential things like indoor climbing or bouldering. I once walked 12 kilometers, just kept on walking. Just like I put a podcast on, just kept, and I never would have done that. I would have thought, wow, Nav, you could have played an entire video game and had an entire pizza or 3 or finished an entire like TV series or anime. But no, I went for a walk.
It's a really good point that like even just say you had tried Muay Thai, but like say that wasn't for you or it wasn't something that you could keep up with. Like I know that this might sound very like oversimplified, but there is truth to it. Like just making it happen is proving to yourself, hey, I did that. Maybe there's like other things I could do. I don't know. Like it opens up that world to like, oh, I mean, if I could like go sweat in a hot yoga studio for an hour and not die afterwards, are there other ways that I can like sweat and push my body and like feel good afterwards? Like maybe. So I wanted to go like just tying this back to, I mean, obviously this is relevant to burnout for sure. But I'm curious because you had mentioned with this, I'm assuming maybe the second time you had a burnout experience, it was different. You mentioned the environment was contributing to that burnout. So could you like speak a little bit more to, and if maybe even if there are other burnout cycles you've experienced, like how they differ in what like got you to that point of feeling burnout?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're all so different, right? Because the
Mm-hmm.
initial startup experience was too much work, fixation on work. Um, the experience I had with that second time, and I would say this is like one of the times that I quit my job, was too little work, not intellectually stimulating work, and not a supportive environment. So I didn't enjoy being in the office. I felt like most of the people in the office enjoyed being there. It wasn't a very supportive environment. The only people that I actually enjoyed spending time with were my clients, but they didn't enjoy the company I was with. So that also rubbed off on me. I didn't have the kind of freedom to work. I was micromanaged. And I would sit there, like I would get a task to do and I'd be like, this is kind of moronic, but I got to do it, I guess. And, it would be something that honestly should have just taken 10 minutes, but it would take me an hour. And I could feel myself just being sluggish. I just, like everything felt like it was like pulling teeth. You know, when you sigh, when you get out of bed and you think, I gotta go to work. Like I was doing that. I was doing that all the time. I was like, I gotta work. I gotta work. Oh gosh. If you have to count down to Friday and it's a Monday, then you know you got problems. So yeah, very different situation there. I got out of that. I decided marketing wasn't for me and I was going to go back into software engineering. And I also felt rejuvenated because I'd been doing all these little tiny things. Like I was doing that thing for the gym where I was like helping them with marketing. I then started my own meetup. So I was running a mental health meetup in Auckland, New Zealand. And I was running another meetup on CSS. And I was doing that to get myself out of this like anxiety space that I was in where I was too afraid to talk to people. Because again, the Muay Thai kind of helped me get out of my shell a bit more. Once you're talking to like there were some pretty zany individuals at this place, right? There was a prison guard, there was a architect, there was a what do you call it, like a forester, like one of those folks that cut down, arborist. There were like all these different types of individuals that aren't software engineers, aren't UX engineers, aren't designers, not marketers. Their jobs are so radically different. And I thought, hey, I'm actually getting pretty good at talking to people now. Why don't I do a meetup? So all these tiny little things just started making me feel good. And then I went back into, started feeling like, oh, cool. I can actually go back to work now. Plus, I kind of need the money. So here we go. That happened. And then I burnt out again. And this time from too much work. And I went into another startup. I was the first hire in that startup. And too much work again. And I was definitely hitting that burnout stage. I could feel it. But COVID happened anyway. So it made the decision for me. And I didn't have a job anymore. Everything in that period was a blur, to be honest. I don't even remember that. I was not burnt out during that COVID period because I felt like I was in a good place. Maybe not financially, but I was living with some people. And aside from some of the anxiety around catching COVID and all those things that were happening around us in the world, I didn't burn out at all until it all kind of slowly disappeared and the world came back and I got a job again. And this time I was in a company that was about the size of like 300, 400. So in the US, that's probably medium. In Australia at the time, it felt large. Again, just too much work and no connection with, when you have a company that big, you lose your connection with the people that you're trying to build for. Because when you're in a startup, you meet your customers, you see the impact. But when you're in a company that's like 400, 500 plus, they're just metrics to you. So that was probably the second time that I went through a major burnout. And then there was a third time again, this time related to boredom. And one of the things, and I know this is going a little bit further ahead, but one of the things I realized is that every single time I burnt out, it was harder for me to recover. Whether it was through boredom or too much work, it became harder and harder and harder. And it would take, from the very first time, it would just take me a week with video games. Then it would take me a month of video games. Then it would take me, 3 months of no work. Then it would take me 6 months of no work. Then it would take me almost a complete year off. And coming back to now, I'm not doing a full-time job. I'm still doing part-time jobs because I don't feel ready to go full-time. So I'm still recovering.
So one thing I want to just highlight that you were talking about was this burnout as a result of boredom or understimulation. I think that a lot of people assume, and I've heard people say this straight up, they assume that the only way they could possibly be burnt out is from overworking themselves or from maybe it's like, maybe there are too many tasks on their plate, or maybe like they're being required to learn while they're working, like maybe too much. Like they're having to like learn a bunch of new stuff that they maybe didn't anticipate. But the reality is, like, I think especially for, and I'm just going to say blanket neurodivergent brains because that includes you. I think neurodivergent brains really need like a sweet spot of stimulation for things to be sustainable for them. And if we're understimulated, that is so unsustainable, like long term. It might, in theory, it sounds cool. It's like, cool, I can do menial, boring work and get a paycheck. And sometimes people like wish that they could just find something like that. Literally, it's not the answer. Like, there's got to be some sort of like happy medium in order for it to actually be sustainable. So I wanted to like highlight that and agree with you completely. I think also people assume, or they might assume, that the more times they go through a burnout cycle, or maybe the more times they experience like emotional upheaval in some way or form, that maybe that builds resilience, and maybe it's easier for you to bounce back the more you kind of are like have experienced those kinds of things. And I definitely can say myself that that has not been the case, especially with burnout. For me, it's similar. It's like it's gotten to the point where I've gone through so many of these cycles. And I've also done the whole like take a few days off, feel better, go back, take a week off, feel better, go back, take a months, almost a year of like trying to rebuild and trying to recuperate. I'm curious because you've already mentioned that like now you're working part-time, and that sounds like maybe that's a way for you um to like maintain at the current level that you're at without overdoing it. But yeah, like can you speak at all to what what you're doing right now maybe to try to avoid going into that burnout cycle again?
Yeah, it's that was definitely the intention, and I can often feel myself. I guess yeah, you're right that you don't build that resilience, but you definitely know what to look out for, right? It's like when you put a slice of bread in the toaster and you burn it. It's not like it becomes suddenly resilient to more burning. It's just burnt and it gets more burnt and it gets burnt again, right? It's not like, oh wow, now I've got toast that I can literally throw into a volcano. It's the same. The difference is in the temperature, and so it's the surrounding, and I think that's where I've kind of realized that I the signs are more obvious to me now. So if there's this smell of toast burning, I know, and some of those smells, if I had to like draw some kind of analogy here, are I'm snippy. When someone comments or sends me a message or something like that, and my instant reaction is like cussing them out. Or when I fly into a rage, and I don't often fly into a rage with someone, but I do internalize it. When I cannot do the work, when it's something that could have taken me 10 minutes and now it's taking me an entire hour, I procrastinate. Like I really procrastinate, and then suddenly I've got this stress of doing everything in a day because I decided I couldn't do it over the week. These are signs for me, and it's the smell, right? And that's how I prevent it. So I catch it. I catch it before I'm burned all the way through. So yeah, it's not resilience in the sense of like, you're not like a superhero character that can suddenly survive everything. But you definitely know where to avoid, and you can definitely catch hints of danger. It's still not perfect because the difficulty is in taking that experience and then making changes to your environment. One of the good things about being a part-timer who's a contractor is I have a greater say in how I can change my environment. I can go back to my clients and I can say, this isn't working out for me. I need to make these changes. Let's not use that incredibly complicated program management technique that you've got. Let's simplify. Let's reduce my toil. So I don't have to update 6 different websites when I make a change. Let's lean into video comms more, or let's ensure we always have an agenda before a meeting. Let's ensure we're always giving ourselves a bit of a heads up before a meeting. I just don't see it suddenly in our calendar, because those are little tiny trigger points for me. And it's a bit of give and take because they can't just take everything on. My manager is stressed as well, parent, all those things. So I have to make some allowances. They have to make some allowances. But if you're in an environment where they can, that's, I guess, me trying to like the equivalent of turning the temperature down on the toaster. I can make it easier for myself the next time.
Very, very good points, because it's true, like doing contract work, I don't know, there's something that can be said about, even if you're the type of work that you do with each new contract is pretty similar, just getting to change it up and getting to like honing your own boundaries over time and figuring out like what you're willing to put up with, what's like a definite no, that kind of stuff. I have a client that I'm working with who works in UX design actually. And she felt she's like kind of like a hyperachiever kind of person. I work with a lot of those. And she found herself like she intended on pursuing contract work and kind of like doing freelance, but then she found herself in this like full-time contract, basically full-time hours. There was this expectation, and it really started to like weigh on her after spending a lot of time there. I think she was there for like a year or so. But we had to have a kind of conversation about there's this expectation that you're going to want to prioritize stability and for things to be like predictable versus the maybe chaotic or unpredictability of the chaotic nature or unpredictability of doing contract work. But like also, I think that some of our brains really, really enjoy being able to do work that we already feel comfortable doing, but switching it up, having just enough of a change in between contracts and in between companies you're working for or clients. It's like just enough of a change for it to be interesting, so you don't get stuck in that like the slog of just like doing the same shit all the time. And especially if like at the very least with companies or clients where you say are working for them like 3 months or 6 months or something like that, maybe you can deal with their bullshit for that amount of time, knowing that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Or maybe you figure out your boundary is no, like I can't handle the way that they operate. It doesn't work well for me. And you actually have the freedom to say no and end your contract, where you wouldn't have that if you were in a full-time position with quote unquote stability, where they can fire you or let you go anytime they feel like anyway.
There's two P's there that always come up when it comes to this like burnout that I notice is perfectionism and people pleasing. 3 P's, I guess. Because not to get into the psychology of this, because there is definitely a psychology element here. But, one of the things that I recognized was that there's a certain upbringing that I brought into my work, that desire to ingratiate myself with my bosses or the stakeholders. Like, I want them to like me. I want them to, it's the same reason that I was a class clown. It's the same reason that I was an office clown. I just want to be liked. I just want people to be like, oh, Nav, that's the guy, And, when you have a certain set of skills, to go Liam Neeson on you, but like you have a certain set of skills, you want to put those skills to please someone. And when they respond back, it's a freaking great feeling. And I'm going to butcher this quote. Oh, gosh, I'm probably not even going to try to quote it, but I don't know if you know Katie Morton, who's like I think she's a bit of a, like, maybe a psychologist, influencer type. Got some great YouTube videos around like psychology and stuff. She said something once about how burnout can kind of come out of your reward is less than than the work you put in. You have this expectation that you're going to put 48 hours of work in, crazy hours, and you're going to get this result back that's going to be, they're so happy with you, or wow, that's an awesome feature and we're going to ship it. One of the things that happens is they realize, oh, cool, that, it's not quite what we thought it would be. We're going to shelve it. And if you're a freelancer, that can happen. If you're in a big company, that can happen. It's very hard to get away from that. You could try to change your work environment as much as you can, but you're just going to hit that situation. You build the greatest product in the world that you think is the greatest product, and no one buys it because it's too expensive. It's not pretty enough. Your marketing budget is zero, whatever. You're going to get disappointed. But if you try to like spend your entire career just pleasing others, you're just not going to be pleasing yourself. and you're going to be burning out. Is that what you say?
Yeah.
Hallelujah?
It's like finger guns, like,
Yeah.
hell yeah, what you said.
Sorry, I want to really quickly mention
Yeah.
someone on LinkedIn. Um,
Yeah,
because
go
I had
for
a
it.
conversation with her yesterday and she pointed out something. So Adriana, who's like an illustrator on Upwork, and I'll probably like give you a link to her profile later.
Yeah.
Um, she told me that she had a hard time with longer contracts. And so she intentionally decided to change up her approach to freelancing and take shorter contracts. There is absolutely no one out there that's saying, in order to be a software engineer, you have to work at Facebook, you have to work in Meta, you have to work at Google. That's just gatekeeping bullshit. You don't have to work at the greatest user experience company in order to be a UX strategist or whatever it is. If you're doing the work of it, even in a small company, you can call yourself that. Like, doesn't matter. And I think having run startups, I've had people come to me, run meetups, sorry. I've had people come to me and they would have this little tiny, like, they would say, they wouldn't be proud of their work. They would say, oh, I build WordPress websites. It's just WordPress websites. And so we're just, I do this, but almost like they feel inferior to the other work that you're doing. And if sometimes that might force you into thinking, I need to work super hard to get into this industry. You get paid to do anything. You're a professional, like that's it. So this gatekeeping that you're only a professional if you're doing this, that's another reason why I think we burn ourselves out.
I absolutely agree with that, because it's also like what you're talking about with people pleasing and basically using validation as currency instead of actual currency or like something tangible that actually like betters your life in some way. Like, validation is so fleeting. And sometimes we're not even actually deep down trying to validate ourselves or the other person. We're trying to get like maybe validation that we didn't experience growing up for like our abilities or our skills or things like that. And we're like playing out those cycles again where we're not being as appreciated because that's what we're used to. Oh man, that's like a whole other conversation that we could go into. Yeah, well,
Part two.
so yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, we could definitely spend another hour talking about this, I think. Well, speaking of that, we're past time. I'm fine with that. Hopefully that's not an issue for you. First of all, thank you, Nav, for joining me and for talking about this, for sharing vulnerable aspects of your experience. I just really appreciate you being here and agreeing to speak with me about this topic. And I wanted to give you an opportunity, if you'd like, to plug anything you want to plug or tell people how they can find you if they want to learn more about Nav.
I want to plug part two because I would love to come back and do one around how I've developed some tactics in my software roles and other things like management as well. And how I've approached, working with people who have certain neurodiversities, myself included, and how I'm trying, I try very hard I'm very cognizant of, having a team that's burnt out and also being a manager and then burning out, trying to avoid my team burning out. It's just burnoutception, right? So we should definitely plug a part two. It'll happen eventually. I'm very candid on Substack and I'm very candid on LinkedIn. So I don't know what those URLs are at the top of my head, but I'm sure we'll paste a link somewhere. Please check out my Substack. Yeah, it's a weird thing. I'll put it this way. LinkedIn and my Substack are very much like these different parts of me. It's just the humor side and then the serious side. And I like to think of it as like a Simpsons episode where, there's a A-B plot. There's a plot A, there's a plot B. And usually there's like a lot of heart at the end of the episode, but then there's a lot of just zany antics at the very start. And I think that's where I kind of place myself in all my social media. It's zaniness with an inch, with just a little bit of heart every now and then. So yeah, if you're interested in chronic depression, anxiety, I've got some really bad stand up that I've done as well. And yeah, check out my blogs.
Sweet. Yeah. So find Nav, check out his work, the content that he creates, the stuff he writes. Thank you again so much for being here, Nav. I really appreciate your time. Yeah. Awesome. This has been great.
No, I really appreciate you appreciating my time and having me on. Like like I said, I really like your stuff, and anyone who's not just in it to build their career and is actually like genuinely trying to help people. Like you don't have to help a million people in order to feel like you make an impact. You just need to help one. I think the stuff that you do is really, really important. And I just hope that you can get to a stage where you don't have to stress out about doing it.
Right? Like, brand partnerships and like
Yeah.
sponsorships and hint, hint. That would be super
Yeah.
sick. And same to you. Really love. I mean, we connected on LinkedIn and I'm so glad that we did. And I think that a lot of people can relate to your experience, not only of burnout, but of the depression, anxiety, your experience in the tech industry. So yeah, please check out Nav. Please do that. He's wonderful.